All right, representing side government from Menlo-Atherton, my name is Gustav Single.
And also representing side government as the second speaker, my name is Daniel Matt.
Representing side negation from Menlo-Atherton as well. I'm Thomas Greenleaf.
Second speaker on the negation is Shauna Shivakumar.
Just to clarify, all the judges are here, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Cash, are you here?
Yep.
Cool. My time's going to start, or well, I guess off-time roadmap. It's going to be top of case, and then we have four contentions. My time starts in 3, 2, 1. Could not be prouder to affirm the motion this House as India would begin a pivot to Asia by focusing its attention on building its relationship with East Asia over the United States. Two main definitions here. First, this House is going to be India, obviously. Pivot to Asia we're defining as a political strategy to increase trade and political relationships in East Asia, primarily in countries like Japan and South Korea, or organizations like ASEAN. Policies would take the form of lower tariffs or free trade agreements and more opportunities for Indian politicians to meet with East Asian politicians. So we argue the Indian pivot to Asia right now includes increased trade deals with East Asian countries and organizations that exclude China. This is because China is the primary strategic threat in the region. Also, India is politically against China. They have many border disputes, and China blocks India in the UN Security Council. The countries see each other as competitors, so it would be illogical to interpret the motion as India trying to increase trade relations with China. The most reasonable interpretation of this resolution is that India would pivot away from China and toward other East Asian countries. The weighing mechanism here is going to be whatever's net beneficial to India, as that's the actor involved. Our first contention is the current decline of the United States. The thesis here is the US is currently declining as a trade partner and political partner, and if India remains tied to it, it will collapse as well. The subpoint A is that US foreign policy is unstable. You can look to Trump's tariffs as an example of this. As Trump enacts trade blocks and tariffs on not only rivals but also allies like Canada and Mexico, it becomes clear that the strength of one's relationship is not a factor in Trump's tariff deals. The current US shift to domestic production impacts everyone, but it especially impacts those who are heavily reliant on the United States for trade deals such as India. In addition, there's a constant shift in priorities from China to India to Europe. Trump loves to play the blame game and he shifts his focus of priorities constantly, targeting different countries at random. This includes allies like Europe and is likely to include India in the near future as well. Subpoint B here is potential US conflicts. The main one we want to highlight is the Pacific conflict or the conflict in the South China Sea. The United States and China are slowly getting closer to a conflict in the Pacific as they keep threatening each other. We think it's important for India to stay out of this, considering without a pivot to Asia, India would be economically tied to both and a neighbor of one. The alternative here is a step back away from a potential conflict and profit from the back. The impact. India won't be dragged down. As the US slowly declines and starts becoming more ambiguous with who the US is allied to, India will be tied to it and sync with that. We think this leads to economic decline and more poverty and more ambiguity in how India can handle economic situations. The alternative is a step back, shifting priorities to nations that are much better trade partners in East Asia, such as Japan or South Korea, and are regionally much more aligned with Indian interests. The second contention is on the necessary supply of goods. The subpoint A here is semiconductors. Supply chains in East Asia from countries like Taiwan will allow India to have a steady supply of semiconductors and other components necessary to develop new technologies. The subpoint B is pharmaceuticals. Countries in East Asia like Japan and South Korea are crucial suppliers and developers of pharmaceuticals. India is in dire need of these given recent disease outbreaks, a lack of sanitation, and an increasing population that's just recently become the largest population in the world. The subpoint C is manufacturing. Goods from India are going to flood the market in East Asia, boosting the Indian domestic economy. When the economy is benefited, the average quality of life goes up since workers are going to have more job opportunities and be paid better, given that the broader economy is benefited. Three impacts at the bottom. The first is innovation, specifically in relation to semiconductors and other new technologies that are imported from East Asia. This increases the average quality of life because if you can innovate more, then you can help the average citizen have a better quality of life when it comes to increased transportation or increased development in things like phones that help people get jobs or help them, have a fun life. But in addition, there's an increased amount of high paying, high standing jobs if you increase jobs in innovating and using those semiconductors to create new technologies. The second here is a greater access to healthcare. We think East Asia is a critical supplier of medicine, which the United States has not traditionally supplied in great numbers to India. And right now, India is in a dire situation, as I stated before. It's facing immense disease outbreaks and it's facing an increasing population, which means it's much more susceptible to disease outbreaks in the future. And therefore, it's critical that India has a supply chain where they can get these pharmaceuticals at a price that isn't unreasonable. The third impact here is jobs in manufacturing and trade. We think this is going to lead to more people rising out of poverty and escaping homelessness because there are more job opportunities created. We think this is pretty intuitive. If you increase the demand for goods in East Asia because of these new free trade agreements, and you can have Indian politicians
clarification. What's the tagline on the second contention?
The second contention is the necessary supply of goods.
Okay.
All right, 442. Expanding on that point, jobs in manufacturing and trade, we think it's crucial to have these jobs because that means more people are uplifted out of poverty, and that's the bottom line. And the link there is that when there's more demand for goods in East Asia because there are more trade relations between Indian politicians and East Asian politicians, and generally there's a greater supply of goods in India and a greater demand of goods in East Asia, that's overall going to increase the quality of life for individuals. The third contention is the Indian Green Revolution. The subpoint A is that there are currently green tech pathways through Taiwan and Japan. There are millions of dollars being put into green tech initiatives, and these could benefit India significantly. But the subpoint B here is even without direct green tech investment from Taiwan and Japan and these other countries, India will still get more access to green tech because of East Asian countries' proximity to China, which puts billions of dollars into green technology and sends those to other East Asian countries. The subpoint C here is that India is in a dire state, with pollution and natural disasters running rampant. We think green tech is one of the only solutions to fix this because it inherently means there are less emissions going into the air and polluting people. First impact is curbing air and water pollution. Many people in India contract harmful diseases or develop chronic diseases over time because they're constantly exposed to polluted air and water. We think if you increase the amount of green tech within India, if you replace the traditional fossil fuels that India has used for decades, then that is a step towards improvement. That's a step towards millions of people not having to suffer every single day from a chronic respiratory disease or other condition that they get from water pollution. The second impact here is fighting global climate change. This is a goal that India has agreed to adopt insofar as they're a part of the Paris Climate Agreement, and this increases Indian legitimacy. Because if they're able to tackle this global issue, then they're seen as more powerful on the global stage, which increases their hegemony and makes countries view them more favorably and more of a legitimate power. Which brings us to the fourth contention, which is about Indian soft power. Subpoint A is a superpower like India becoming a dominant trading partner and political partner in the region will create Indian soft power, or the ability for India to better control and influence policy decisions in international organizations. The subpoint B here is that India is going to be less susceptible to abusive trade deals because inherently, if they have more market capital and more political capital, then they're able to negotiate trade deals better so that they don't get the short end of the stick. Subpoint C here is that Indian goods will be more preferred on the market because India holds a greater market share and they're viewed as a more valuable ally on the global stage. At the end of the day, Indian soft power is a net benefit to India and probably the most important one. Therefore, for all these reasons, vote government.
All right, wonderful speech, Gustav. My name is Thomas Greenleaf. I'll be the first speaker, also over Menlo-Atherton for the negation side. Quickly off time, I'll go over framework, then the negations case, then the affirmations case. Is everyone ready? Or is anyone not ready? All right, my time of 8 minutes and a 30-second grace will begin on my first word in 3, 2, 1. Now, all right, on the very top of case, I think we agree broadly with their definitions. This house is India. A political strategy probably means like pushing towards more relationships, like political relationships, diplomacy with these different countries. We think that East Asia is economically tethered to China, right? China is Japan's #1, probably #2 trading partner, right? China is Korea's #1 trading partner. Asian receives most of its investment from China, right? The Asian Central Doctrine, ASEAN, right, for Asian. Central central doctrine is probably neutrality. And Asian countries refuse to take sides in big, great power competition. They're avoiding like balancing coalitions, right? China is attacking. We broadly agree that India ought to be anti-China, and we also agree with the weighing mechanism of net benefits to India. On the observations, we have an additional observation. We think that India has ties with many regions simultaneously, right? A pivot which the app has to defend probably implies choosing one priority over another, which India has historically been able to avoid because it reduces leverage in their own autonomy. We think that the government case like can't defend also keeping ties with the United States and the same amount that there exists in the status quo. That's not a pivot, right? They need to actually defend reallocation of strategic focus. Now onto the negations case. Our first contention is on security. The first point here is that the United States is the biggest and most powerful ally that India has, right? They're the only one with nuclear weapons. They're the only ones with enough troops to combat China. There's massive exploration of military technology that India does not get anywhere, right? There are advanced missile systems that the United States has, the jet engine technology, anti-submarine warfare, this sort of intelligence sharing that the United States is only capable of, that like India cannot get access to outside of the United States, right? India also gets access to United States bases, and the various allies that are allied with U.S. through the United States. So the A point here is that the United States is the only counterweight to China, right? East Asian states, they share or they don't share land borders with China, right? Japan, Vietnam, Korea, so they can't really assist in the Himalayan front where real conflict occurs. And the East Asian countries are already dominated by China through economic independence. We think that the second point here is that the pivot is going to take time and it signals strategic drift. The A point here is that China has historically escalated when adversaries appear isolated, right? Look to history. Shaunak tells me about the Sino-Indian War, or in 2020 there was a Valley clash or various skirmishes where if India deprioritizes its U.S. partnership, China perceives that as weakness, and so they're going to increase interborder aggression to see how far they can push it. Probably going to increase their naval presence in the Indian Ocean as well. The third point here is that East Asian states can't actually assist India. The A point here is that Japan and South Korea, they already depend on United States security guarantees. They can't independently confront China for India's sake. The B point here is that Taiwan and Vietnam, they already have their own conflicts, so they don't really have the resources to aid India. The C point here is that they're all funded by the United States. They're all on a leash. You're just going through the middleman if you're trying to ally with them for security purposes. The fourth point here is that the United States commitment to India is on a brink right now. It's super fragile and it needs constant attention and investment. The A point here is that the United States is already signaling unpredictability in Asian commitments. Under multiple administrations, the United States has shown inconsistent engagement with Asia. They withdrew from Afghanistan. They waived commitments to Taiwan. And the B point here is that U.S. attention is really stretched thin, right? The United States is juggling the Ukraine war, Israel, Gaza escalation, right? Their inability to help is really, or their ability to help is really limited. You have to focus their attention on India. The C point here is that alliances are interest driven, right? If the United States only, the U.S. only stays engaged if India also stays engaged, right? If India looks like they're playing in with other people, the United States is just going to give up. They don't really care about them anymore. The United States strengthen ties with countries that reciprocate attention. Look to Japan, Australia, Korea, these things. Fifth is geopolitics. The A point here is that China is Pakistan's closest strategic partner and a major supplier of Pakistani arms and its largest investor. India's largest threat is probably caused by Pakistan. We think that China controls East Asia and would never help India, so shifting over to East Asia loses the ability to combat Pakistan and probably gives China more control over that. The B point here is that East Asia never chooses India over China, right? Japan, South Korea, and Asian, all the countries inside of it, all rely on Chinese trade. None of them would risk sanctions or reliance to intervene in a border conflict in the Himalayas for India. The impacts are twofold. First, we have state autonomy collapses because you're ceding autonomy to China because you don't have anyone to defend you against that, right? India loses authority over its own territory. And secondly, there's regional conflict because there's spillover from Chinese skirmishes into more lasting battles. Our second contention is on economics. The first point here is that the United States is India's most important economic partner. The A point is that they're the largest export destination. The United States buys more Indian goods than literally any other country on the planet. Losing this preferential access probably cripples Indian exporters. The B point here is that India has a huge IT sector, which is hyper dependent on the United States and its Western allies. The C point is that the United States produces high-end goods, which are essential to Indian economic growth, like semiconductors, chips, software. These are high-tech inputs that India cannot domestically build and are required to actually get any growth in the areas that lead to like their industrialization.
You
The second point here is that I'm sorry, I don't have enough time. I'll take it at the end if I can. Second point here is that only the United States is threatening trade sanctions, right? East Asian countries, they don't have any sanctions on India. There's nothing to gain. There's so much more to gain from trying to focus and butter up to the United States. The United States partnership is the internal link as well to India's next phase of growth because they control all of the technology. Third point here is that cheap trade with the United States is the internal link to any economic growth at all because in order to industrialize India, you're going to need 5G networks and US investment in startups, this sort of thing. So the impacts are you're going to have faltering economic growth. Companies are going to flounder because they can't export to the United States. And third, the public is going to push back against this policy. All right, on the AF case, we have a number of responses. First, on the decline of the United States. First of all, we don't think the US is declining. They have a record stock market and huge investment in the military. Third, second point here is we think that even if Trump is like a little bit like crazy, like he can still harm India. So you ought to cozy up to him because he can harm India more than any of the rational actors who exist in East Asia. That means that like Trump is the only one who's going to impose a 400% sanction. So you ought to really like take that as a credible threat and cozy up to him. Whereas elsewhere, you know, in East Asia, they're not going to impose that sort of thing. They have less to gain just from, yeah. All right, continuing on, second contention on the necessary supply of goods. We think that semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, this sort of manufacturing, these things are super dependent on the United States. The United States basically controls like all the best semiconductors, right? Even if TSMC like manufactures them, companies like Nvidia or Intel are the ones who actually control their production. But also, if India pivots away from the United States, it loses the brain of semiconductors, even if it keeps the hardware, because they control like the tech economy. They control all of the software and this sort of thing. Pharmaceuticals, like healthcare, all this sort of thing. That's already possible because there are low sanctions between East Asian countries and the status quo. You're not losing that because like that's just what's happening while they're cozied up with the United States. On their third contention on Indian Green Revolution, we think that like technology is always going to be better than the United States. That the global leader, it's always going to be better to like have them. But also like tariffs are only like happening under. Oh, and China and East Asia are probably the worst polluters in the world. So, like, they're not the ones to talk to think about green energy. The United States is the only green energy partner that reduces India's coal dependence. Like, look to U.S. battery technology and nuclear small modular reactors that they've sent over to India. On their final contention of Indian soft power, we think that soft power comes from security and economic scale, not alignment with East Asia. So, security is an internal link to getting soft power. In order to be credibly soft or have credible soft power, you need to be protected from outside threats, and that is only possible through the United States. Thank you, and vote for the litigation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that speech. Quickly off time, I'm just going to be going over top of case, I think followed by opposition case, followed by government case, and it'll probably be a little bit slower than that. Yeah. If everyone's ready. Okay. My time begins now. I think one clarification needs to be made about the opposition side. They're not improving relations with the United States. They're sticking with the status quo. What we are offering is an alternative to the status quo, a shift towards Asia. They are just sticking with the current status quo in which we see the United States declining as a trade partner, in which we see the United States consistently hurting allies, not just its enemies. Let's start at the top here. They say that these Asian countries receive funding from China, like ASEAN needs China as well as its primary funder. We agree with this, but we also think that based on our plan, there is still no direct connection to China. You are benefiting a little from China improving these allies that you are making through this shift towards Asia, but you aren't having a direct connection to China. This is the point of what Gustav's framing is about. Secondly, they provide an observation where they say that India has ties with many regions simultaneously, and we agree with this. We think we want to improve these ties. Okay, moving on to the opposition case. Their first contention is about security, and they give you these like 4 or 5 subpoints here, and I think their fourth subpoint is the main one that we have to look at because it kind of negates everything else that they're saying. Their fourth subpoint is talking about how U.S. commitment to India is currently on the brink and it needs attention. But there is no guarantee that the US is going to focus on India. They're maintaining with the status quo, in which we see the US signaling unpredictability, which we see the US moving away from countries. They aren't improving relations with the United States. They're sticking with this current status quo, in which they themselves say that US commitment to India is on the brink. This undermines their other four sub-contentions, which are based on the US providing security and providing military to India. But this doesn't make any sense at all. If the United States military is currently unpredictable, we have no guarantee that they will help in any way, shape, or form. A couple more responses just in case that one doesn't make any sense. We think if you look to other countries in the area, you can see like a militarizing Japan. You can see other reliable militaries in the area that will protect. We also think the US bases in the area are more likely to get into conflict, and we don't want India to get involved in this conflict. We would much rather them take a back seat in which they can profit off of the war rather than be a part of the war. We don't think a tie with the US military is a good thing in this case. Finally, we also think India has one of the most powerful militaries in the world. This is the reason why it is such a superpower within Asia. It is going to be able to protect itself. Maybe perhaps it has to prioritize its military a little bit more, but this is better than one, getting into a conflict, or two, relying on a military which my opponents themselves say is unpredictable. The truth is that you aren't going to have anything. They characterize like our connections with East Asia as going through the middleman, but we argue going through the middleman is better because you aren't going through the straight man that will get you into a conflict and is unreliable. They also say that China is likely to attack India if it sees weakness. We think based on India's current trade with China, which is at like an all-time high, we don't think China will attack. We don't think this is the case at all, as this is not in their interest. On their fifth subpoint, they also say that China is a supplier of Pakistani arms. We say that if you improve connections within the area, like it isn't likely that China is going to continue to China isn't going to supply as much as it also does need India, as India will become soft power wise a power in this nation. Okay. Onto their second contention of economics. The main idea here is that the US is India's largest economic partner and that India is reliant on the US for a number of industries. A couple of responses here. We say that this trade and partnership has collapsed in recent years. You can look to the US tariffs on India and general allies that the United States has. Sure, the US is a large trading partner with India, but at the same time, it is slowly becoming a worse and worse trading partner. If you only focus on the bad rope that is holding you there, you are going to be pulled down as it sinks with you. And the truth is, India needs to expand. It needs to connect with other areas. And this is what you get when you focus on the government plan. We also think when they talk about semiconductors, the US gets its semiconductors from East Asia anyway. India can get its semiconductors through East Asia, like Taiwan as well. You don't need to go through the United States where prices will be higher because you are trying to get through a middleman. It is better to go to the source. It is better to go to these East Asian countries directly. They also say that cheap trade in the US is logical to any is necessary to any industrial change. With increased tariffs on foreign nations, cheap trade is impossible. The United States itself is shifting towards China. It doesn't need cheap goods from India because China is supplying cheap goods at a more rapid rate. Trump is cozying up with Xi Jinping, and we think it is much better for India to focus away from the side that is needing it less and to focus more on the countries that need it more. These are the countries within East Asia. Finally, on their impacts, they say the public will push back on this policy. We say this is untrue because we don't think the public is going to push back on a policy that is beneficial for India. Okay. On to the government contentions. Our first contention is on current U.S. decline. They give two main responses here. First, the U.S. has like a record stock market and that it has investment in the military. We think, sure, maybe the U.S. in some aspects when it comes to military investment and the stock market is increasing. But if you look at what Gustav is actually telling you about the United States as a trade partner declining, they don't actually say anything about this. The truth is that as a trade partner, the United States is becoming worse and worse. It is is enacting tariffs not only on enemies but on allies as well. We think this decline as a trade partner, if India continues to only focus on the United States, will slowly tie it down and pull it down into the depths of what we see the United States falling into as a trade partner. Secondly, they say that even if Trump is crazy, he can harm India more if they leave, like imposing a 400% sanction. We don't think he'll harm India, mainly based on their own points where they say the United States is also reliant on India, or we think he's just unlikely to hurt him, or we think he's just as likely to hurt him in the opposition world, where you don't do anything, because we've seen him hurt allies as a trade partner as well. He is imposing sanctions and tariffs on Canada and Mexico. We see him hurting the current trade partners that the U.S. has had for so long. We think he's going to do the same to India in the near future. On our second contention of necessary supply, they give also two responses here. The first is that these things are dependent on the U.S. because the U.S. has the best semiconductors, the best tech, and that by focusing away from the United States, you lose the brain of semiconductors. The United States is not the brain of semiconductors. East Asia is. The U.S. gets its semiconductors from East Asia. We think it is much better to go directly to the brain, which in this case is East Asia. On pharmaceuticals, however, they also say that pharmaceuticals are already possible because of low sanctions within East Asian countries. We say, but you can improve this. You can go against the current struggle of medicine that Gustav is telling you. And if you improve this, you are actually able to improve the situation. We see the status quo not working, and people within India are not able to get pharmaceuticals. On our third contention of the Indian Green Revolution, they say that tech is always better in the United States and that China and East Asia are the worst polluters in the world. But this ignores the main point. We aren't talking about green policy. We're talking about green tech. The main idea here is that China is the top China is the top polluter in the world because they have such a high population. They're currently investing billions into green tech. You can see this also in East Asia. We are saying that you can get better green tech or cheaper green tech from East Asia, not the United States, which is currently not investing in green tech. On our fourth contention of Indian soft power, they say that you can have security and economic scale, which are the internal link to Indian soft power. We think India currently has security and is able to build security by not relying on an unreliable military power, and it's not going to be able to rely on the U.S. economy in the future. For all of these reasons, so proud to affirm.
Okay, great speech. The order is going to be a little bit of framework, and then it's going to go to the negative case and then the affirmative case. Okay. Time begins now. First, look to what the government is saying. They think that India will be able to successfully trade with East Asia, and these East Asian countries are not directly, India is not directly connected to China because the East Asian states are acting as proxies and they're connected to China. But I think they fundamentally misunderstand the argument here. China is Japan's #1 trading partner. China is Korea's #1 trading partner. I can name you maybe 12 other East Asian countries, Vietnam, Laos, that all depend on China. The point being is that geopolitical region is dominated by China. China has hegemony in that region. It controls the South. It controls the South China Sea. It controls that entire region militarily, economically, and in every way, shape, and form. The point being here is that if India wants to go and trade with any East Asian country, even if they're not directly involving themselves with China, they are directly involving themselves with China because all these countries are literally just Chinese states pulled up on a string. They are dependent on China for literally everything. And so India will have to succumb to their state autonomy, and they will have to cede a lot of their own advantages right now so they can deal with China. So we think this is going to be a lot, like this observation probably informs your ballot. Okay, go to the negative case. The first response that Daniel makes here is that if you're more likely to be tied with the U.S., you're more likely to get in the conflict. No, incorrect. We say here that no one wages war in the U.S. Look to the 1960s. India had no major ally. Chinese attacked. Look to 2020. India they were deciding elections. They didn't have a stable relationship with the United States. There was a transition of power. We say here there was no specific time where India has had a stable relationship with the U.S. There have been times in history where the U.S. had a stable relationship with India, and India has not been attacked once. There have been times where US has not been involved in India and India has been attacked a lot of times. China will attack India if India seems alone. The argument is very simple and it is very true. The other argument here is that there is no argument that US is going to just focus on India, that US is moving away from countries. But no, we think this is a reason to prefer our side, because if US commitment is unstable, the US must India must double down and not pivot away, because our alliances are transactional. Because if India deprioritizes the US, that means they are lower in the priority list. Right now, they're pretty high. Trump slapped India with a 0% tariff. There's no tariffs on India. The US and India are already pretty close right now. There's no reason for you to leave this relationship when you're already pretty high on the priority list. The India and US relationship is pretty strategic for a lot of reasons. The US believes that India is a major technology hub. It's close to China, shares the largest land border, and it's close to Pakistan. And we say here these are all unique reasons why the US wants to be in contact with India. And if India signals their movement away, you will just become another country that is slapped with 100% tariffs. The US is 400% tariffs on China. They're not friendly. They clearly want India as a locus to put their a locus of defense and a locus of trade. Yeah, they say they're currently unpredictable. They're only unpredictable to the countries they don't care about. They're predictable to the countries that they do care about for the most part. We see here that they're probably much better actor. Yeah.
If they're predictable to the countries they do care about, why did they slap tariffs on Canada and Mexico?
Of course they did. I mean, we say here that sure, that's inevitably going to happen. I can name you 15 Chinese things that have happened. Like, for example, they cut subsidies to the oil industry. The oil prices in Malaysia skyrocketed about 3,000%. We say here, I can give you a bunch of examples of how China has been has strings over a lot of these other countries, and it's led to a bunch of other worse things. But nothing happened to India. We say here that sure, you can give examples of China and Mexico, but India is way more important than China and Mexico to the US than India is. They're uniquely important. And the fact of the matter is the precedent proves.
Look to Qatar.
Oh yeah, look to Qatar is a great example of this. Also, they say other reliable military in the area like Japan that can protect. Incorrect. Japan cannot project any military forces into the Himalayas. First of all, look at Japan, where it is on a map, and look at India. How do you expect to get troops to India? I think just logical sense, there's no land border, there's no mountain, there's no legal ability, there's no political mandate, there's no ability for you to get troops there.
The Constitution amendment.
And also there's a constant, they're quote unquote remilitarizing is pure speculation. There's no, okay, this is, I think you're never going to vote in this because there's no way that Japan is able to send troops to India. There's no reason they would. Japan cannot independently even fight China for its own disputes. They get tackled by submarines, and also they would never do that. They're China's largest trading partner. Also, China-Pakistan border scrimmages. India's powerful, but China is much stronger. Pakistan proves there's a conflict that's been going for 70 years in Jammu Kashmir. There's also been border skirmishes with China and India that have been happening in the last couple of months. The uniqueness trends prove that it's more important than ever to improve relationship with the United States. Then they say that China will not attack. Incorrect. I gave examples of Chinese skirmishes, submarine attacks, South China Sea domination, Pakistan attacking. It's uniquely important to maintain a good relationship with the United States. Then they make the argument that if you only focus on the bad road, you'll be pulled down. This is pure speculation and pure vibes. This makes absolutely no sense. The U.S. is India's largest. They buy the most amount of goods from India. They are the reason why India is being uplifted in the status quo. They say that trade and partnership has collapsed from tariffs. Wrong. Tariffs did not hit India. Also, they say semiconductors remain in Taiwan. Okay, this is a big point that I'm in that it's also going to be crossed by the AF case. I don't think they understand the idea that semiconductors are worth nothing if the tech that accompanies them is bad or not up to par. Because the leading standard in technology right now is the United States. China, for example, even if they broke and had the biggest technology, they would never share that with India. They would never share that with India. The U.S. has the most advanced technology software and is openly sharing that with India right now. The reason why they're able to use semiconductors is because of the technology, the AI cloud compute that's happening, the manufacturing, the infrastructure that the United States supplies is uniquely key. None of these other East Asian countries has anything remotely to the United States. The United States is a technology hub, and they will always be the technology hub of the world. They'll say U.S. is cozying up to China. Incorrect. They have 400% tariffs in China every other month. So that's not true at all. Okay, go to the AF case. The first argument here they make is that the U.S. is unreliable as a trade partner. Incorrect. We say here that like to their closest allies and uniquely to India. Sure, they might say like Mexico and Canada, but uniquely to India, they haven't ever hit them with tariffs before, which is a reason to stay close right now because they're inevitably already high in that priority list. But instability is a reason to stay close. Look to how they put like a 10% tariff on Canada, but like a 400% tariff on China. It means that if you're probably closer with the U.S., you're hit with it less. And inevitably, the Chinese economy was like is significantly impacted. If you look to like Myanmar and look to other countries that were close with China, their economies went bust because they're also like the U.S. Whatever, like U.S. bad things hit them the most. And also by that, India right now is entirely wholly reliant on the U.S. So tariffs would hit them the hardest right now. Yeah, and then also go to their semiconductor points. Yes, once again, technology outweighs every single thing. The U.S. will always have access to semiconductors, but no other country will have access to the same level of technology. Innovation is happening in technology right now, not in the semiconductor. Sure, semiconductor innovation is happening, but innovation is primarily in technology, the AI revolution happening right now. You cannot run a modern technology economy without American infrastructure. Also, big turn here. We say here that East Asia would flood and cripple the Indian market because East Asia manufactures more cheaply than India. East Asia is the factory of the world. They would not buy Indian manufactured goods. They would flood the Indian market with their cheap goods, which would destroy any Indian state autonomy. Which, like, point being said, like, you should be going and you should be voting on the state autonomy collapse insofar as it's prereq to all of their arguments, insofar as state autonomy is the interlink to being a security, interlink to soft power, interlink to making any decisions about anyone else. They also say like, oh, China is green tech. Well, no, we say China is the biggest polluter in the world. The green tech is often just it's often a disguise for you to offset their carbon emissions. The U.S. has the largest green tech right now, and they're currently supplying to India. We also think this is not like contended as a result by any side. And Indian soft power, once again, security, they've dropped. Security is the interlink to soft power. Insofar as we are winning security, we are winning the soft power argument. And security is only here when we have once again economics prove that India is the United States is India's most important economic power. They're the most important defense partner, and it's the way that you vote negative because it's security and economics are the interlink to any sort of app argument, climate change, soft power, or anything else. So vote next.
All right, my name's Thomas Greenleaf. Again, I will be the third speaker for side negation. Quickly off time, I'll go over. Yeah, I'll go basically same order as my partner. Framework, neg case, af case. Everyone ready? All right. My time will begin on my first word in 3, 2, 1. Now, okay, on the very top of case, they seem to claim that we are not actually going to be like building relations with the United States, and that like if we're at a pivot point, it's only going to go downhill from now. We don't think this is the case. We think that like the affirmation is defending like reducing relations with the United States. This was one of our observations, but also if we're not focusing on East Asia, we're probably able to focus more on the United States, or at least to maintain the existing relationship from the status quo. Again, our evidence only proves that the status quo is good for India. Right now, there's no tariff on India from the United States. The status quo is good, but it could be very bad, as is proved by the rest, you know, how other countries have been hit by tariffs by the United States. All right, on to the negation. The biggest and most important issue on your ballot is going to be security. This is because security is what death outweighs everything else, right? The possibility of further skirmishes in Pakistan, the possibility of having to spend huge amounts of money on militarizing to combat China, the possibility that you're going to have millions of citizens dying in conflicts that could have been avoided is going to outweigh every other impact on the board, right? So that means that if you buy any point under this security contention, you're going to be automatically voting for the negative. They've dropped a number of things. First of all, you can flow through all of my partners' responses. Again, there are no other reliable forces in the area that can protect against Chinese aggression. They've already conceded that China is aggressive, if not like straight out by proxy through Pakistan. And they've also conceded that, or we've proven that when you're allied with the United States, that is enough of a deterrent to get China off of your back. Again, when India has not been allied with the United States, China has attacked, and when India has been allied with the United States, China has left them alone. So from this, you're buying that like a U.S. Alliance is essential to keeping China away from India. That means that we are the only one who get access to the security contention, and therefore we are the only one with access to the highest voter in the round. If you're not convinced yet, we can go down to the economics contention. This basically takes out the entirety of AF offense. Again, they've sort of conceded the United States is India's most important economic partner in the status quo, and because the American stock market, the American economy doesn't look like it's flagging, they will likely be the most important economic partner in the near and far future. So that means that if you poke the bear, if you poke the sleeping giant, which is the United States, and they put on a 70% tariff, that causes no economic growth in India. That is the internal link to being able to buy anything, to being able to have pharmaceuticals, to anything else. Because if the United States is upset at you and you export all of your goods to the United States, essentially, or to United States allies, then you are unable to get any economic growth, any economic benefits, and you are just completely crippled as a nation. So again, we also think the United States produces the high-end goods that India requires. What?
Software.
Yeah, the software, but also like Nvidia and AMD and Intel, which are all American companies, control the ability to produce, like they control the patents for the semiconductors that are the top of the world. The only reason that Nvidia is worth so much is because they control exclusively the access to their like proprietary technology. That means you cannot buy them from Taiwan because Taiwan does not own the ability to produce them. Taiwan only produces them for Nvidia, and they would never give that up. All right, so flow through the economics contention. Again, this functions as like a case turn, but it also means that in the app world, you're going to see faltering economic growth. Companies are going to flounder. You're probably going to see huge pushback from the public, violence in the streets, people dying of poverty. On the AF case, they claim the US is declining. We don't think this is true. Again, my partner has a bunch of responses here. Flow those through. There are other contentions on like the Green Revolution and this sort of thing are all fail because they've conceded important points on the economic advantage. If India does not have enough economic might, they cannot ever have a green revolution, right? They can never buy that sort of thing. But also China and East Asia, they are huge pollutants and they have really low tariffs on India in the status quo. So if they could garner anything from these countries, they can do it in the status quo, and they're already doing it. Whereas the United States is the only actor in this round who is capable of levying huge tariffs because we have someone like Donald Trump in charge. Again, their final contention on soft power, we internally link to that because hard power is the internal link to any soft power. If you're not credibly deterring everyone else, you don't really have anything, right? You need hard power in order to have soft power. If they don't have soft power or hard power, they don't have soft power. For all these reasons, vote for the negation.
Great speech, Thomas. Of course. All right. Everyone good? My time starts in 3, 2, 1. You're madly in love with a distant romantic partner. They stop giving you presents. They're less invested in spending time with you. On the other hand, there are a bunch of friends you could hang out with that would improve your quality of life significantly. That is who we're choosing in this round. 2 pieces of overview at the top. First, the opposition isn't increasing efforts to trade with the United States. It's sticking with the status quo. Our opponents consistently talk about trying to strengthen this relationship, and this misconception loses them this round. If the status quo is getting worse, then we need to do something. There's no guarantee that India won't be tariffed in the near future or it won't experience some kind of economic uncertainty because of the US's fluctuations. And this lack of certainty is incredibly damning because it proves that we need to do something. The second overview here is the United States has no incentive to continue relations with China. The only benefit the US gets from strong relations with India is cheap goods. However, we've characterized that US-China relations are already getting stronger now. There's no unique benefit to continuing fair deals with India because even with the 400% tariff, China is still the United States' largest trading partner, and Trump is meeting more frequently with Xi Jinping, something that Daniel tells you that went unresponded to. So it's clear the US is cozying up to China, so why would India continue being the cuck in this situation? Going into their collapse. First, on security. What we want to say here is that US bases would not go away. There's no link to say that the US would just pull out all of its military forces. But even if you don't think it's true that the US...
Any response to security base, i.e. that like the US wouldn't remove the security base, that's a new argument in the PMR. The argument I hear in the MG is there's more conflict around bases, but there's nothing around the US is not going to pull out their bases. So I think this is just a new reputation to an LSE argument that should be made in the MG.
I'm pretty sure Daniel said it, but I haven't.
This is my main response here, where I say, you guys yourself say, yeah, whatever. You can.
Okay, it's his main response. Okay, resuming. But even if you don't think that point's true, US security is going away either way. They themselves say that the US military is unreliable and pulls out of areas unpredictably. They also say that India needs to rely on the US military alone. What does this mean? It means they're currently at a vulnerable stage, and the US is an unreliable actor that can just pull out their military willy-nilly. They also dropped that India has one of the largest militaries in the world. It has the manpower. The only thing the US uniquely produces is the military technology. But our opponents never refute that they can just get the technology through the middleman, which is other East Asian countries like Taiwan or Japan. So they get the technology either way, and they already have forces in the Himalayas. So if they get the technology in either world, there's no unique reason to vote them on the security point. But even if you agree with them on security, we completely outweigh. Let's take them at their best. China invades some small towns in the Himalayas. They don't invade the entirety of India. If we have a chance at stopping global climate change or stopping millions of people from being poisoned from air and water pollution, we think this is a terminal impact that outweighs this entire point, because even if you buy that a couple thousand people die in the Himalayas, you have to buy that we have a risk of solving millions of people dying every single year from chronic respiratory diseases. The second collapse here is on economics. We think the US is India's most important economic partner, sure, but China is the United States' most important economic partner, which means the US is currently trying to prioritize China. They talk about money being pulled out of India, but let's think about it real quick. Sure, the United States is a powerful country, but a pivot to East Asia means increasing investment and trade from countries like Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and other powerful, wealthy countries in East Asia. So this is at best non-unique, because you still get an equivalent amount of funding from East Asian countries versus the United States. But in addition, the United States is going to tariff India anyways. It has no issue slapping tariffs on its closest relationships, look to Canada and Mexico, and it has a main goal of shifting towards domestic products. India is providing a lot of products to the United States, and once Trump recognizes this, he will obviously tariff them in the near future, which means that the Indian economy is doomed either way based on this scenario. There are three paths to the ballot.
Point of order.
Yeah.
The argument that India is flooding the US market with goods, which is going to cause increased tariffs, is it like that's a specifically new reason as to why like there's going to be increased tariffs when we make the argument from the LOC? I just think, yeah, Trevor's fan on that.
Okay, I think we literally stated this in our first speech, how the United States is already taking money away. Like, the reason why the US is tariffing China is because it wants to increase its domestic production. But if this is a new point, then that's fine. I'm at 333. There are three paths to the ballot for the government side that outweigh everything our opponents tell you, even if you grant them economics, even if you grant them security. The first is the Indian Green Revolution. East Asia is the only solution. There are millions of people in India who die every single year because they contract harmful diseases or develop chronic diseases due to being exposed to polluted water and air. People are living every day suffering, so even if they don't die from their illness now, they can't function as a human being. The only thing our opponents say to this is that China is the largest polluter in the world. We already told you that that's because they have one of the largest populations, and they're also the country putting the most investment into green tech in the world. It doesn't matter if they're polluting the most, if they're actually pumping money into finding green tech solutions. In addition, we're not just talking about China here. Japan and South Korea are also heavy producers of green technology, and our opponents have no refutation to this. So because this is the case, you have to buy with 100% certainty that India is going to get more green technology, it's going to start replacing its fossil fuel technology, and it's therefore going to increase the air quality, it's going to make the water quality better, and therefore millions of people won't have to suffer every single day because they're simply breathing air. But the second way you can vote government here is on pharmaceuticals. This is something they completely fail to respond to. I tell you that India is currently suffering from increasing health problems due to disease, sanitation issues, and a constantly increasing population in India are suffering right now from chronic health problems, and the only way to solve this past the status quo is more pharmaceuticals, which come from East Asia, not the United States, something I told you in my first speech. And that is a clear reason to increase free trade agreements with East Asia and make it easier for pharmaceuticals to enter the Indian market. But the third way you can vote government here is on the economic scale. The US is shifting away from India. We create more trade and manufacturing jobs in our case, something conceded from my first speech. Their only response is that East Asia is going to flood the Indian market, but we think India has much more capacity to produce cheap goods, which means India is going to be much more preferable in the East Asian market, therefore increasing jobs. At the end of the day, we have three unique reasons to vote government, therefore you have to vote gov.
Good round, guys. Good round.
Good round.
Good round. Give me a minute to choose a ballot.